Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff.
Thanks.
As always, thank you for downloading, listening, liking, and commenting on our podcast videos. Please join our community by subscribing to us on the socials. Our handle on all platforms is at N2E Fantasy. We are also available on all major podcasting apps by searching N2E Fantasy. Alex, what do we have on today's show?
All right. On this episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, we are covering the league news, both leading up to the final initial 53-man roster cuts and those cuts themselves. So let's cover all the notable news first, and then we can go team by team, the notable cuts. So, Jeff, you get to take a victory lap this week as the Raiders officially named Gardner Minshew as the Week 1 starting QB over Aiden O'Connell. Jeff, what do you have to say about this?
A lot to say about this. So this was one of our bets, and who would be the Week 1 starter between these two? And Gardner Minshew did win, so I will take my victory lap on that. I do believe last week, like before this happened, you were like, it's going to be so sweet when I sweep you. So at the very least, neither one of us is going to sweep each other. We're done with the sweep talk. We are down to 1-1 right now, so we are going to see what happens there. Alex, how do you feel that he'll do as the starting quarterback? I think it was the right choice because I just like his veteran presence.
I don't think either one really is significantly better than the other, which makes this kind of a non-story for most fantasy players out there. I think that he has the safer floor of the two, and he is a better distributor, and he's got a little bit of a gunslinger, even though he doesn't have that strong of an arm, and he can make plays out of the pocket, so he's carrying those skill sets with him. I think that for the long term, I think Aiden O'Connell would have been better, but I obviously feel like they think he needs to develop a little bit more, and I don't think that this is the end of Aiden O'Connell with the Raiders this season, because I think that there's at some point where they'll probably switch starters. But that being said, I don't think the Raiders are necessarily a playoff team, but I think that they'll be pretty competitive this year.
I know, this is where you kind of have to pick a direction that you're going to go because you had them maybe as number 2 in the division at one point.
I think they might still be number 2 in the division, but I don't think that says that much. I think it's just the Chiefs that make it out into the playoffs.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see. You think only the Chiefs make the playoffs out of that division? I mean, that's a good segue into what next week will be. Next week will be our final season predictions going into the year. So we will see what 14 playoff teams that Alex and I have going into this year into January and February. Right. So speaking of naming quarterbacks as starters, we have 2 rookie quarterbacks here getting named starter, and that's quarterback Jaden Daniels is the Week 1 starter for Washington, and for Denver, quarterback Bo Nix. Seemed pretty obvious. Do you have anything to add to this? Was this the right choice?
I think both were the right choice for slightly different reasons, but I think for fantasy reasons, Jaden Daniels has the higher fantasy upside, but lower fantasy floor because he could get hurt in virtually any game the way that he throws his body around. And I think that the Broncos have a slightly better offensive line, but worse top receiving option. So it'll be interesting where those guys are at the end of the year. I think they're kind of both in tough divisions. So we'll see long term, but I really like Bo Nix a lot. I almost put him in my top 2. I think I still had him in my top 3 going into the NFL draft. And it's a perfect fit with Sean Payton, so I'm very excited for him. He looks like a legitimate pro quarterback, and Jaden Daniels looked pretty good too, considering that they don't even have number 2 wide receiver on the roster as far as we know. So we'll be looking to see if they bring in a former teammate of his or whether they do anything else at that position. But it certainly looks fun, and the future looks bright for those 2 teams. We can kind of casually mention that Drake May end up starting Week 1 because of Jacoby Brissett looking terrible in the preseason and that shoulder injury. We'll see.
They're still hedging a little bit, but we'll see.
I think Drake May is going to be good long term, but at the same time, I don't necessarily want him out there because I don't want him to get destroyed before he can get his career kicked off. That offensive
Yeah.
line is one of the worst I've seen.
I think out of the three of them, I think in redraft one quarterback leagues, I believe that Jaden Daniels is the only draftable one out of the three of them. And I think that he's probably a top 12 quarterback right now, so he's worth that pick.
He's worth it until he gets hurt. So
Yep.
if you draft him, draft another quarterback with him.
Anthony Richards. Oh wait, they both must be hurt at the same time, right?
Now, Anthony Richardson, you have to pair with Joe Burrow so that one can start the year and the other one can finish the year.
Closer, fantasy closer. So speaking of things that could start off the year, we could have the Cowboys with Ezekiel Elliott and Rico Dowdle as their starting running backs. But eventually they could bring in Delvin Cook, who they brought in for a workout today. How do you feel that Delvin Cook would fit with this team, and do you think they sign him?
Well, he would fit with a Jerry Jones-led team just for the name recognition, but as far as talent and skill level at this point in his career, I think he's past his prime, and I think he would just be a deep depth piece. I don't think he's got any elusiveness or explosiveness. I think he's just a big back now. If you've seen workout videos of him, he's completely shredded, ripped, but I think he's heavier than he's been. So I don't necessarily think it's going to translate on the field.
Absolutely. I should add Delvin Cook to one of my dynasty teams so I can have the Cook brothers and call it like Cooks in the Kitchen.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yes, with the number 2, like
Yep.
never too early fantasy.
Yeah.
Anyways, speaking of signings, not potential signings in this case, but the Chiefs reunite with recently released wide receiver Juju Smith-Schuster. He was recently released by the Patriots and signed by the Chiefs. He should not take too long to pick up the playbook because he was part of their team last year. But what do you think of this signing? I know you're not the Juju guy, but what do you think about this for the Chiefs?
He wasn't on the team last year. He was on the year before that. Last year he was on New England. But I think he's in a better situation with the Chiefs than he was with New England. I think that makes him borderline fantasy interesting this year. He could potentially be the third or fourth wide receiver for Kansas City, especially third at the beginning of the year until Marquise Hollywood Brown is back. But I think that it's a good move for both Juju Smith-Schuster and the Chiefs.
Yeah, I still don't see how he breaks out of the Brown, Bryce, and Worthy of it all. So I don't know if he sees the field a ton after Marquise Brown's back. And I think Justin Watson should still be ahead of him because there's a reason why that they have kept Justin Watson around for so long. I think it's the chemistry and the trust to be a backup wide receiver that he has with Patrick Mahomes. So it'll be interesting to see if he's a fourth or fifth receiver to hit the field. So speaking of receivers that'll hit the field, and we just talked to a Cowboys news just before this, but the Cowboys finally extend star wide receiver CeeDee Lamb with a brand new big 4-year deal. He has about a week and a half to ramp up activity. Should be fine to get week 1 started. Do you think that there'll be any rust to CeeDee Lamb to start the season, or you think he's good to be fired up?
I think it's good to be fired up. I'm more interested in this 2-game exemption that is associated with him. There's some kind of 2-game exemption on him, and I don't know if that's for him holding out or what, but I did see that it could be lifted at any time. So as far as ability, I don't think that's going to be an issue, and I don't see why the Cowboys would want him out the first 2 weeks for any other reason either, because they're desperately going to need him with how bad that offensive roster is, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I have not seen anything on this 2-game exemption. What exactly have you seen on this 2-game exemption? Because I own CeeDee Lamb in a league or 2 already, and I will be very curious to know what this means, and our listeners would be very curious to know what this means.
The Cowboys were granted a 2-game roster exemption for Lamb and have placed him on the commissioner's exempt list. So that's all I know. I know he's returned back to practice. I know he signed that deal. So I would imagine that they would take him off him shortly.
Yeah, I'm hoping so because they're going to need to hit right out of the gate. And if they want to keep pace with the Eagles this year, who just keep adding star-studded player and star-studded player and star-studded player. So speaking of star-studded players, Bengals wide receiver Ja'Marr Chase ends his hold-in, returns to team practice without a new contract. Does not seem like he is going to get that new deal. I mean, there is a possibility here now in this next 10-day window of something happening, but it seems like he's willing to play regardless if he gets a new contract or not. Am I reading the tea leaves there Correct.
That's what my take is. I know that the Bengals owners are among the cheapest in the league, so they're going to hold off paying him as long as they can. I would expect that he wouldn't get a new deal yet.
All right. So, other moves that have happened this last leg of the preseason. This is it. We're almost at the regular season, first of all. So, Saints bring tight end Juwan Johnson off the PUP list. He is decently draftable at this point. So, like, I would say he's probably around the tight end 20 range. So, if you do want to roster 2 tight ends, would consider rostering Juwan Johnson. And Bengals extend kicker Evan McPherson with a 3-year deal. So, any takeaways from Juwan Johnson or Evan McPherson?
I mean, Evan McPherson's probably one of the kickers people should target in the top 7 of kickers, I would think. Juwan Johnson, it's hard to really pinpoint a value because they have Taysom Hill, who just seems to vulture points from every position on the Saints offense. So he's not really on my radar unless you're looking deep in like the late 20s at the tight end position.
Right. So, yeah. And then, I mean, you just reminded me of something before. I was just going to hop to the next thing. And you reminded me of something that Taysom Hill is not always going to be tight end eligible in every league. So please check your league settings before you draft Taysom Hill and think that he's going to be a tight end in your league. He may just have strictly quarterback eligibility. So just something to check out on. Every platform is different with this.
It might be running back next year, but depending on his usage this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. I think we can move on to the cuts because I had alluded to a few star-studded trades or star-studded additions for the Eagles, and we'll get to that very shortly. But here we're going to go division by division and just kind of list off the cuts. And we're going to say if there's any fantasy relevance or if anyone else got any fantasy bumps and if there's any place that you would like these players to go to. The first set is the Buffalo Bills here, and that's running back Frank Gore Jr., which I know is one of your favorites, Alex. Wide receiver KJ Hamler, which is actually one of my favorite players. He scored a touchdown in place of Frank Gore Jr. in the 3rd preseason game. And then tight end Trey McKitty that they got from the Chargers last year. Impact the top receivers, running backs, or tight ends for fantasy. And then do you see these players going anywhere?
As far as receivers, I think that they should still be looking to add to that group after getting rid of KJ Hamler because I feel like they're still missing a deep threat. They lost Gabe Davis in the offseason, and they've experimented with Claypool, Hamler, and they've experimented with some other guys, and I think they let all of them go. I know that they drafted Keon Coleman. I know that they brought in Curtis Samuel as a Swiss Army knife. I know that they also have Shakir, but is there a 4th or 5th wide receiver on that roster that you like, being a local?
You got your MVS, you got your Mac Hollins. I feel like those are your speed demon threats down the sideline. And I know Josh Allen turned John Smoke Brown into a thing his first year in starting in this league. So it's possible, but we will see what actually comes of that. But
so for the running back position, I feel like the Frank Gore thing. Sorry if I got you off. The Frank Gore thing provides surety for Ray Davis. So Ray Davis is locked in for sure as the number 2 back behind James Cook. They're most likely going to heavily feature both of them. And I think Frank Gore latches on with another team that needs that kind of power rusher that I feel like Frank Gore could be. He doesn't provide that much as far as pass blocking right now or from the receiving game. So he's more of just a pure rusher. So someone's going to need someone like him. He did well in the preseason. He's very productive in college. He has the athletic profile similar to what his dad had. So I think that he can fit in somewhere else. But the Bills made their decisions with their roster, and I think that they've got a pretty solid group.
So I think that they are trying to be more Swiss Army knife versus dependent on a number 1 wide receiver. And I think that they've done that by adding different types of wide receivers to the team this year. So I think that's going to make it harder for teams to game plan which wide receiver to take out because you never know which receiver's number is going to be called that week. And while that's not great for us for fantasy because we may not know which wide receiver to start, that is great for your Josh Allen's, probably even your James Cook, and then your Dalton Kincaid of the world too, because I think Kincaid is probably the one constant on this team. Like weekly, I think in and out, you can expect him to be part of the game plan.
All right, let's move on to your division rivals, the Miami Dolphins, and it seems like most of their moves were more injury related. They put wide receiver Anthony Schwartz on the IR. Looks like the season-ending version. And wide receiver Odell Beckham Jr. stayed on the PUP list, so he'll be out for the first 4 weeks at a minimum. And another wide receiver, Eric Azukanma. So he's not someone I'm particularly familiar with, but it looks like they're going to be relying on which top wide receivers. What are the top wide receiver group left on Miami? I think they only have 4 on the active roster right now.
Yeah, so who's going to be their number 3 right now to start the year?
They have Tyreek Hill and Waddle as 1 and 2. So we're looking at Berrios, or they still have Malik Washington, correct?
Yep, but you just said the number 3 receiver just before Malik Washington.
Well, it seems like they might be using Jonnu Smith more than you think that they're going to use him.
Ezokanmi is how you say it. Ezokanme.
All right.
I looked at the pronunciation for it, but he was surprisingly a pick of the Miami Dolphins, and it looks like he was a 4th-round pick in 2022. So he's a guy that I've been tracking for a few years. Surprised that they gave up on him so quickly. I hate when teams draft a player and then give up on him so quickly because they just didn't know what they were getting, or they drafted incorrectly, or new coaching staff's in. I think the team could have used Anthony Schwartz. There's a shot that Anthony Schwartz gets a injury settlement and gets to sign with another NFL team. But I think if something happened to Tyreek or Waddle, I think that they could use another deep threat like Anthony Schwartz would have been, but too little too late there. And I think Beckham, I think the whole goal was to get a guy for down the stretch, and I wonder if he was guaranteed to go on the PUP and miss training camp, which is the most brutal part of an NFL player's summer. I always wonder if that's thrown in there. But Jonnu could be a guy to own this year, Alex. Could be.
All right, let's breeze through the next 2 teams in the division. Patriots, Kendrick Bourne remains on the PUP list. He will miss at least 4 weeks, and they're keeping basically all the other wide receivers. So that's an interesting decision that they're making. They released Bailey Zappi, who will probably find another team pretty quickly, and Chad Ryland, kicker there, who was Bill Belichick's 4th-round pick not that long ago.
I know. So it seems like they're clearing out the Bill Belichick realm of things. Bailey Zappi should easily find a backup job in this league, but with the way that they have constructed their quarterback room with Drake May and another rookie and Brissett, this made the most sense. I probably would have cut Brissett because I don't really see much value there. I see more value with Bailey Zappi long term. Even this year, I'm wrong on that. I'm not wrong for 5 years down the road. Chad Ryland, they picked Joey Sly over him, so that's an interesting thought. And it's a bad look for Bill Belichick that's been a 4th-round pick on a kicker. And I'm really surprised that they kept 8 wide receivers, including Kendrick Bourne. So, I mean, Kendrick Bourne won't take up a roster spot for the first 4 games, but something's going to have to give there. And I'm not drafting a single one of these wide receivers right now until I can kind of see it on tape. I mean, the only person I would take a risk on is like Demario Douglas, maybe Jalen Polk. I know you like him.
More long-term. Polk is more short-term.
What? I didn't see that coming because Polk was a higher draft pick.
Baker went lower for character concerns, I think.
Well, I'm still concerned about his character.
All right. And so the last team in this division, the Jets, nothing notable. They still have a lockjam at the running back position.
Yeah, they even kept Izzy. So no changes to the wide receiver or running back core that was projected to be kept. So we can hop over to the Ravens now. And on the Ravens, wide receiver Russell Gage was cut. And running back Keaton Mitchell will remain on the PP list, which means he'll miss at least 4 games, and he'll likely miss more because his torn ACL happened later at last. I think Mitchell was to be expected, but Gage kind of could have sewn up the back end of the wide receiving core, like over a Wallace that they have, or I don't know. They just have a bunch of people that they keep cycling through.
I still think if Michael Thomas's body isn't completely destroyed, he would be a good fit there if he's healthy.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like anyone's calling Michael Thomas these days, though. So I don't know if his phone's broken. He doesn't have electricity where he's staying, but we need to get him on the phone and get him somewhere kind of quickly. So we can hop to the Bengals. No notable fantasy roster moves there. Everything was to be as expected there. The Browns, they traded kicker Cade York to the Commanders. And so that makes Dustin Hopkins the starting kicker. He just signed an extension a few weeks ago, so we had anticipated this to be the case. Both running back Nick Chubb and running back Nyheim Hines remain on the PUP/NFI lists. I think Nyheim Hines is on the NFI list because his injury happened outside of the game of football. He'll miss at least 4 weeks. With the bye week 5, they are both out until week 6. Which makes this next cut extra surprising. They also cut D'Onta Foreman, wide running back for the Browns. So the Browns are down to just 2 viable running backs, Jerome Ford and Pierre Strong. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Do you think they bring back D'Onta Foreman after they make a few additional moves?
I think they bring Foreman back, most likely. Maybe they'll scoop up one of these running backs that got cut.
Frank Gore Jr.? You're going to put him everywhere, but I think he ends up on the Bills practice squad right now. All right, so nothing notable there. They just need a third running back going into the year because I don't think Pierre Strong or Jerome Ford have been super successful at carrying the load. I know Jerome Ford did it for a slight stretch last year, but that's just one little stretch. We've seen one-hit wonders before. So we're heading over to the Steelers, and wide receiver Quez Watkins was cut. Kind of surprised me a little bit because I thought he was going to be their 4th or 5th wide receiver behind Pickens and Van Jefferson and Roman Wilson and Kelvin Austin, but that was not to be the case. And I don't think that anyone would have picked him, but he kind of moved a few guys up the depth chart for me, including Kelvin Austin. So thoughts on him before we move on?
Really didn't think he was that great of a wide receiver prospect, and I'm not surprised that they cut him. He wasn't really on my radar in fantasy purposes, and I think that they'll bring in somebody who can compete a little bit more. At least that would be what I would do in their situation.
I hope they can find somebody. But he's the younger brother of former Buffalo Bills wide receiver Sammy Watkins. So then we move on to the Texans, your Texans. So we're out of the AFC North, and we go to the South, and they waived 2 wide receivers, Ben Skowronek, Noah Brown, and they also waived injured tight end Tegan Quintano, and he'll revert to IR if he clears waivers. Any impact on any of these 3 moves, or these don't impact fantasy that much?
If they stayed on the Texans, I don't think that they would have had any fantasy relevance. Noah Brown could latch on with like the Cowboys, or he could make his way to like the Washington Commanders and reunite with Dan Quinn over there too. So he could potentially be someone to target. Skowronek, I don't know if he does anything other than special teams for anyone out there.
He should latch on somewhere, though. You'd think even as a 5. There's a few teams that only have 3 or 4 wide receivers right now. I think that he'd be an upgrade over anything Atlanta has right now.
Well, yeah, and Atlanta's offensive coordinator came from the Rams, and that's where the Texans got Skowronek, so that might be a good fit there too.
Yeah, I mean, it would make a lot of sense. I think he could have some fantasy I think there's going to be someone outside of Pitts, Mooney, and London from the receiving core that has fantasy relevance, and I just don't know who or what that is right now. But that is coming up in a little bit. We can hop over to the Colts. Colts placed tight end Jelani Woods on IR, ending his season with a toe injury/surgery. They were thinking about putting him on the short-term reserve, or the short-term IR, and getting him back around Christmas time, but they decided against that. So that was kind of an interesting reversal. He has not played very much since he's been drafted, so this might be it for his tenure with the Colts. They also cut, surprisingly here, they also cut Evan Hall, running back. I know Trey Sermon has been dealing with an injury, and they have like Tyler Goodson, the running back that missed the catch from Gardner Minshew that could have won the game last year. I know you'll always say that the Minshew had the bad throw there, but man, it hit him in the hands. And I've always been told since I was a little kid, if it hits you in the hand, you got to catch it. So
if it touches the skin, you got to bring it in.
Yep, absolutely. And so they're going to run with 3 running backs right now, but obviously this is just the initial roster. So could be a lot more moves here in the next 24 to 48 hours. I would expect most rosters to be completely locked down by this weekend. So by Labor Day weekend, I would assume most rosters would be completely locked. All the jumbling will be done for the most part. I'm gonna knock on wood right now to make sure that we don't have another Travis Kelce injury during the week before a game. I'm not saying it'll be Travis Kelce, but I'm knocking on wood for anybody out there because I went pretty very hard on Travis Kelce last year, and I had him on a lot of my teams, including my big money league, and he did not start good out of the gate last year. So, all right. So we can move over to the Jaguars, and that is tight end Josiah DeGuara. Not a big fantasy impact there, so that means Brandon Strange just kind of moving up the depth chart there. But he was not. Neither one of them were expected to have that big of a role behind Evan Ingram, who has had a pretty killer preseason. He had 2 touchdowns when the starting offense was out the other day. So Trevor Lawrence looked good. I know you might roll your eyes at that, but he looked really good and really comfortable in this in his setup of wide receivers now.
So did Mac Jones.
We'll see what happens. All right. So then we can move on to the Titans. Titans traded quarterback Malik Willis to Green Bay for a 7th round pick, and they released running back Hassan Haskins. Hassan Haskins really hasn't played for the Titans. He was on leave due to a legal issue to begin with. And so this kind of just ends his tenure with them. Any fantasy relevance to either one of these players before I move on?
Well, Malik Willis is going to be the primary backup to Jordan Love, so if something happens to Jordan Love, he will have fantasy relevance.
How long do you think it'll take him to get up to speed? And do you think that they keep a third quarterback on practice squad just because Malik Willis is not up to speed?
They probably put Pratt, who they waived, to the practice squad, so they'll still have him.
Absolutely. I know you liked him, so we will see what happens there. The practice squads get filled out in the next couple of days here. So we move on to a team that had a couple of interesting cuts, and the first one was wide receiver Tim Patrick and running back Samaje Perine for the Denver Broncos. What are your thoughts here? Because I have a lot of thoughts.
I'm honestly surprised they weren't able to work out trades because I know that they were working the phones to try to do that. But to me, Tim Patrick was the wide receiver 2 for the Broncos, so it didn't really make sense to cut him. I don't think his salary was that expensive. Samaje Perine just got stuck in a very deep running back group, and I think he'll latch on somewhere where a team needs a pass catching back or a rotational guy. Tim Patrick apparently is going to be signing with the Lions initially on the practice squad, but since they only have 4 wide receivers, and we'll talk about their cuts later, I guess, they'll probably get promoted to their 53-man roster, is my guess.
I would hope so. He looked really good in the preseason. It doesn't make sense for the Broncos, who are thin, experienced wide receivers, to cut him. But they decided to go that route. They decided to keep Josh Reynolds over him. It seems like Josh Reynolds right now entering the season is going to be the number 2 wide receiver, Mims the 3, and Franklin the 4. All the beat writers for the Broncos are saying that Troy Franklin is going to need a year to develop before he's an actual NFL wide receiver. So I don't get getting rid of Tim Patrick there, but Sean Payton and Bo Nix must not like him. I'm assuming that they both made the decision together. I'm assuming he's going to listen to Bo Nix and who he's comfortable throwing to and not get rid of his safety blankets and such.
They gave Bo Nix 6 roses, and he had to hand them out to the receivers.
He must have tripped on the way to Tim Patrick, and like the rose got destroyed or something.
He probably just gave it to the first 6 and wanted to give them to everyone, ran out.
Sorry, Tim. You guys were in alphabetical order. Sorry. I can't give you a rose. All right, so Chiefs. Now we can hop over really quickly here. Kadarius Toney, Justin Ross, 2 wide receivers got cut. Tight end Irv Smith, who we talk about on this podcast way too much, and running back Keotani Ingram also got cut. So it leaves them with 2 viable running backs right now, CEH and Isaiah Pacheco as the starter. And then they also have Irv Smith cut, so they do have Noah Gray. They have a rookie tight end, and they actually traded for a tight end today from the Dallas Cowboys. So they do have 4 other tight ends, but to move on from Irv like this makes it seem like Irv is pretty cooked, and this might be the last that we hear of Irv Smith in this league. He had so much promise and so much potential. I do think that he had a torn ACL or an Achilles. I forget which one it was. that kind of derailed his career. Tony doesn't really surprise me. That seems more like just wanting him out of the locker room type of move. I feel like if he wasn't such a bonehead, that his talent probably would have kept him around as a 5th or a 6th wide receiver. And then Justin Ross was the promise that didn't get lived up to. He was the undrafted darling a few years ago that everyone was like, oh my God, we love him. The Chiefs were the only one willing to take a risk on him. So anyone here of note, and what do you think this does to the receiver core?
I agree with you that Irv Smith is cooked, and I'm just glad Kadarius Toney, that experiment's done. It didn't work out in New York, didn't work out in Kansas City. He's got athletic ability, but he just doesn't have what it takes to be a wide receiver in this league. So that experiment's done, and they're moving on.
Yeah, so that's good, and I think that just makes more opportunity for Xavier Worthy to contribute in year one. We know what Sky Moore is. I'm surprised Sky Moore made the roster. I think Tony's a better wide receiver than Sky Moore, but they must have be keeping him for punt return and kick return purposes, because he did do that a lot last year. Oh, right. So the Raiders' only notable cut there was wide receiver Jalen Guyton. And it surprised me because I thought that for sure he was going to make it as the deep threat 4th receiver. And that just did not happen. And I expect the Raiders to be in the market potentially for a 4th receiver, which makes it seem like Trey Tucker has ended up with the 3rd wide receiver spot. And what that means is that he may have some fantasy relevance if anything happens to Adams or Myers this year. Were you a Guyton guy?
I was not, no.
Right, so we can move on to the Chargers. Chargers made some big cuts here because it was some big pieces from the previous regime. Longtime tight end Donald Parham is gone. So now they are rolling with Will Dissly and Hayden Hurst at tight end. So that's a big change this year. And they cut Isaiah Spiller and Elijah Dotson at running back. So they are going to be rolling with the former Ravens duo of Dobbins and Edwards. And also they're going to be rolling with Jarrett Patterson and the rookie. So any fantasy relevance there, or I think Vidal is his name.
Vidal survived. Woo!
He did.
That's about all I took from that. I think it's too early for them to cut Quentin Johnston, so they're going to give him another chance this year. I know you believe he's 4th on the depth chart, but he survived this far, so we'll see how that goes.
Your boy Brendan Rice made it so far. He's currently listed as the 7th receiver, so he might be one of the first names that gets crossed off in the next 24 to 48 hours. Let's hope not, though, because he actually had a pretty impressive preseason, and he would latch on with the team pretty quickly, even on the practice squad. So we can hop over to the NFC. The Cowboys had no notable roster moves. They left their top 3, what I projected to be their top 3 running backs on the roster, of Elliott, Dowdle, and Vaughn. So all the other running backs were cut. They might bring in Delvin Cook there, but we'll see what happens there. Moving over to the Giants, they cut running back Joshua Kelly, which was a little surprising to me because I thought that he would be a good pounder behind Devin Singletary, but that doesn't, and they cut him kind of early, so I don't really expect him to even go back to the practice squad. That was like more of like a see you later, don't call us, we'll call you type of situation. Isaiah Hodgins and Allen Robinson and Miles Boykin, and we're all cut. And then also wide receiver Isaiah McKenzie went on season-ending IR. So his season is effectively over. And so this kind of gives us what we've been asking for with the Giants. We have some clarity on their receiving depth chart. So we know it's going to be Neighbors. We know it's going to be Wan'Dale Robinson. We know it's going to be Jalen Hyatt. And we know it's going to be Slayton. So we do know what the top 4 wide receivers look like here. They must be comfortable with Gray, Tracy, and Singletary at running back too. So that's an interesting little tidbit. But they might pick a running back up off the waiver wire as well. Do you think this is the last we hear of Allen Robinson, and any other tidbits that you want to take away from this?
It should be the last we hear about him. When I first saw the news that the Giants cut wide receiver Robinson, I thought Wan'Dale at first because I forgot Allen Robinson was even on the team. Gave me a little start, and I was like, oh, it's Allen Robinson. At this point, that guy's a shell of himself.
Well, I'm a little surprised they signed him, and I'm a little surprised that they're not keeping a veteran there. I mean, they're counting Slayton as their veteran presence in the locker room. But either way, this receiving core should be better this year, and I think Daniel Jones should be better this year. I'm a little concerned about his knee because Not because I think that he's going to tear it again, but I think it could hamper some of his rushing ability, at least to begin the season. And that's part of his charm, is his ability to be able to run the football. I know you don't like this when I compare this, but he reminds me a lot of Justin Fields, like stat-wise and performance-wise. So we can hop over to the Eagles. They cut CJ Uzama, who might just be done because they cut him well before cuts were ready to be done. I think they cut him the Friday after their week 3 game. They put tight end Albert on IR, meaning that he'll miss the first 4 games of the season. So they're a little depleted at the tight end position right now. They cut Paris Campbell, wide receiver, and they cut running back Ty Davis Price. And that might be the last time we hear Ty Davis Price. I also believe that they put Smith, their rookie receiver, on IR return as well. So we kind of have some clarity around what their receiving core is going to look like. And we'll go over right after this who their new addition is to the team. Any feedback on the Eagles?
I'm good there. Nothing additional.
Oh, right. And then the Commanders, they traded wide receiver Johan Dotson to Philadelphia Eagles. So now the Eagles have a third receiver in place, as we were just talking about. So we know it's going to run through A.J. Brown. It's going to run through Devonta Smith, and it's going to run through Johan Dotson here. So basically, they have their 3 receiver sets completely set up. Johnny Wilson will be waiting in the wings. Smith will be waiting in the wings. And they also have Dallas Goedert as well. So I think they're stacked. And then you add Barkley into there. This is stacked. It was a really hard team to spread out the target pie that I refer to from time to time on this team, because they are like so star-studded, and they're pretty deep too. So they could potentially lose a receiver for a week or two and they'd be fine. And then after acquiring kicker Cade York from the Browns, they cut kicker Riley Patterson. So Cade York has won that job officially. And here was my surprising one. I thought he did really well last year with Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson out last year. Chris Rodriguez, running back, got cut as well. So I don't know if they're going to bring him back to the practice squad, but they decided to keep Joe McNichols instead of Chris Rodriguez. And I think that was a mistake, but only because of youth, probably. I like the young guns.
Well, that's your favorite team name across all your leagues. Young Guns. All right. So the Bears, we're moving on to the NFC North now. The Bears really didn't have any notable fantasy roster kind of cuts. Lions cut Donovan Peoples-Jones, which is a little bit of a surprise. Got down to 4 wide receivers, but they're going to be adding Tim Patrick. We'll see if they add any additional guys to that position, but it looks very thin behind Jameson Williams and, of course, Amon St. Brown, their top 2 wide receivers. Jeff, are you surprised by the Donovan Peoples-Jones cut?
Yeah, because I think the splits the weight of the world on Jameson Williams. Like, before he almost had to be good, now he really has to be good this year, because there is nothing behind St. Brown and Laporta in the receiving core on this team right now. Josh Reynolds is gone, which I think is a big mistake, because I think him and Jared Goff had this chemistry. And I know he's not like a world beater or anything like that, but he's a great third receiver for Jared Goff.
I mean, the Broncos missed an opportunity to trade Josh Reynolds back to the Detroit Lions and keep Tim Patrick. That probably would have been the best situation for both of them.
Yeah. I believe you are correct on that as well. And it's never too late, but it does seem like it is too late at this point. It does seem like they're moving in that direction. But Peoples-Jones, he's kind of a deep threat that should catch on with somebody. I know you had mentioned Buffalo needing a deep threat, but there has to be another team that needs another deep threat out there. Could the Chiefs put Marquise Brown on IR return and bring him in? Anything is possible, so we will see there. But we'll hop over to the Packers here. The Packers had some misinformation come out today. They put one of your favorites on IR, or at least it was reported to be that case, and that was running back Marshawn Lloyd. But in turn, when they finally released their actual roster, they did not put him on IR. Instead, they put running back A.J. Dillon on IR and ending his season. So this is season-ending IR. This is not return IR. He got his second stinger in 9 months. So I do know the GM said, and the coach said a couple of weeks ago, that they take 2 neck injuries like this back-to-back very seriously. So they took it so seriously that they decided to put him on IR. I do think that this ends his tenure with the Packers as well. I don't know if on the podcast Alex and I have argued about this, but we've argued offline about this. Who's going to be better, Marshawn Lloyd or Josh Jacobs? I just want to call him Brandon Jacobs there. Just had a moment that I went back in time, but Josh Jacobs. And we were just talking
that good, can he?
No, we're just talking before this here, and there is a world where both Jacobs and Lloyd both exceed their actual draft spots, and yeah, so we'll see what happens there, but we both could be right, and I know we won't love that, but we'll both take a small victory out of that. Oh, right, and then they also cut their kicker Anders Carlson, which means kicker Greg Joseph won that kicking battle, so they cut bait on the guy that was a rookie last year, and they have now went with Greg Joseph, former Vikings kicker. So kind of interesting. But Dylan kind of does thin out their receiving core behind Lloyd and Jacobs. So be on the lookout there if there's any injuries. Oh, right. So then we have, speaking of the Vikings, we have tight end TJ Hawkinson that will remain on the PUP list. He'll miss up to 4 weeks. We did report that a few weeks ago, so we expect him to miss probably around 6 games roughly. And they cut running back Ni Quan Wu and Miles Gaskin and tight end Robert Tanyan. I think the 2 running backs were a little bit of a surprise because that just leaves Aaron Jones and Ty Chandler as the 2 running backs on the roster, so they still could bring one of them back. And then Robert Tanyan was a little bit of a surprise in regards to, I felt like he was a good fill-in for TJ Hawkinson behind Josh Oliver for the first 4 to 6 weeks, but I didn't think that he was a long-term prospect this season, but I thought that he could have filled in a couple of games to start the year. Any thoughts with the Vikings, other than they lost their kick returner?
I think they'll find another running back to bring in. Hawkinson was expected, so I think he'll be back shortly, though.
All right, moving on to the Falcons. No notable fantasy roster moves for that team. So we can move on to my Carolina Panthers, which I'll just turn around the hat because whenever we talk around the Panthers, I'll just make sure that the hat is visible, even though you can't see my face like this. But as expected, Jonathan Brooks, he's going to miss the first 2 games. Now he's going to miss the first 4 games because he's going to remain on the NFI list for at least 4 weeks. And they cut former second-round wide receiver Terrace Marshall. Kind of surprising, but it's better to cut bait on a player instead of keeping him around too long. He wasn't in the plans to be in the top 3 or 4 wide receivers this year. I mean, they got Mingo, Leggett, Thielen, and Johnson, so he wasn't even supposed to be in that top 4. So better to cut bait and kind of let him go start over somewhere else. He's still quite young. If I am not mistaken, he is currently 24 years old. So he could latch onto a team. He just turned 24. So he does have a possibility of maturing and developing still. So I know sometimes we write off players a little bit too early, but he might be a guy to keep an eye on and find a new landing spot tomorrow, probably on a practice squad to begin. Any thoughts on the Panthers transactions, or were they as expected?
As expected, I thought there might be some more cuts, like maybe Adam Thielen or something like that in addition. So I'm surprised it was only this.
All right. We can hop over to the Saints, where we just have a couple running back moves. They cut running back James Robinson. It's probably it for him in the league. And then we have Kendre Miller going on IR, which means that he misses at least the first 4 games of the year, which I think that they are growing tired of, and his time with the team may be limited. But this is all really good news right here for Alvin Kamara, because Jamal Williams seemed kind of cooked last year, so we'll see what happens in 2024. But I think the arrow is pointing up for Kamara this year. Right. So we can hop over to the Buccaneers, and they put running back Chase Edmonds on season-ending IR as well. So that kind of ends his year. He had missed all of the preseason with an undisclosed injury, and now he's just out for the year. So he could come to an injury settlement and end up with another team, but not very likely. And then Alex and I had reported earlier this offseason that Sterling Shepard was coaxed out of retirement, and he has been cut now by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers after his buddy Baker Mayfield asked him to come try out for the team here. So seems interesting to have a quarterback ask you to come to the team and then have him be cut. So something doesn't feel like it's communicating with something else there, or Sterling Shepard really just is cooked, and it's time for him to go home and be a family man, because I think that's what he was trying to do before Baker called him.
So if it's a team decision, then he might still end up with like the Giants where he played before. But if he just doesn't have it anymore, he'll retire. And if not, he just might not want to play. I don't know.
Yeah, we will see. And now we're on to the last division, and we'll start with the Cardinals. And the NFL suspends wide receiver Zay Jones, who I expected to be the number 3 receiver in Arizona, but now it seems like Greg Dortch could get it and run with it. So it'll take him off the initial 53-man roster. They cut quarterback Desmond Ridder, which makes the whole Desmond Ridder for Rondale Moore trade completely irrelevant now because Rondale Moore is out for the season and Desmond Ridder is now unemployed. So just feels very why did that happen kind of trade. And then we move on to Michael Carter being cut, which was surprising because they have DJ Dallas and Amari, I think is his name, DeMarcado. And I thought that Michael Carter would have been able to beat both of those guys out. And it's kind of surprising that he is not a 3-back on this roster. So I think he's a guy that you should watch out for on a team like the Packers that definitely need some wide receiver depth now that Dillon is out for the year and Marshawn Lloyd is injured. I mean, I think he would be a really good backup for I want to say Aaron Jones, but Josh Jacobs. Cannot get the Josh Jacobs name right today, folks. Sorry.
Frank Gore Jr. would also be a great back for any team to pick up.
Yeah. I think Michael Carter is more NFL ready right now, but we'll see on that. There's nothing behind in Indy that would stop me from going to pick up Michael Carter. I don't know. There has to be a spot for him somewhere, but clearly, it's not going to be with the Cardinals. At least it doesn't seem that way. I mean, he could be snuck back onto the practice squad, but they tried to trade him, so I don't think that's going to be a practice squad candidate due to the fact that they tried to trade him. So that moves us over to the Rams here, and running back Boston Scott got cut. Not a big deal. Running back Zach Evans, a little bit of a surprise because he was a dynasty darling last year. So that leaves Corum and Rivers and Williams as the top 3 running backs there. That part was to be expected. That was what I had the 3 running backs being, but I expected Zach Evans to get a shot to at least hold on as the 4th gig. Because he's only entering year 2 in the NFL, but they must have seen enough already. Boston Scott, I think he's kind of cooked. He's going to be signing with the Steelers practice squad, so he is going to be joining a practice squad relatively soon. And tight end Tyler Higbee, as expected, remains on the PUP list. He tore his ACL in January, so he might be out for a majority of the season, which I think you have some tight end news with the Rams that you had shared with me that I'll let you share in a second, but Tyler Higbee will miss at least the first 4 games. Will likely miss a lot more than that. So, what did you hear from the Rams? Who their number 1 tight end is going to be this year?
The Rams beat writer mentioned Colby Parkinson's going to be the tight end 1 for them, and they've had success with tight ends finishing in the top 10 or 12. So he's someone that could potentially be brought onto your team for free because I think he's going undrafted in all redraft leagues, and I think he's in the waiver wires in most dynasty and redraft leagues. So he's someone you guys can scoop up. And even if you don't think he'll be the guy the entire season, he will be the guy for at least 4 weeks and maybe more. So someone sneaky to pick up.
Think about this too. Puka has missed the last 3 weeks with an injury. So it
Cooper Kupp has missed time throughout his career as well. So plenty of opportunity.
But Puka might be getting his legs under him week 1, and they might just pepper Parkinson with targets. So something to be on the lookout for there. Because there's a difference between being in shape and being in game shape, and you might get winded really quickly if you haven't been out there practicing for 3 weeks. All right, last 2 teams. The first one is the 49ers here, and they have a slew of cuts. They cut running back Matt Breida. They cut running back Keyshawn Vaughn. Those were both to be expected when they signed them because they signed them as camp bodies when they lost Mitchell and they lost Mason for a bit and they lost CMC for a bit. So, and they lost the rookie Garendo also. So for a bit. Also, they put running back Elijah Mitchell on season-ending IR. So Elijah Mitchell is done, and I'll let you break down what you think that means of the backfield as soon as I'm done here. They cut Robbie Chosen, which I know is one of Alex's favorites. Wide receiver Danny Gray, which he was supposed to be something. They actually spent a decent high draft pick on him, and he just never amounted to anything. They also cut Cameron Latu, who was a draft pick last year, missed the season with a torn ACL, I believe. And they cut tight end Logan Thomas as well, leaving very little behind George Kittle there. So, what do you think happens at running back, and is there any other fantasy relevant areas here?
Mason's time to shine. So he is the number one handcuff to have behind CMC, and he may even have standalone value if they're serious about scaling back CMC's workload to keep him healthy.
Yeah, I mean, CMC did a great job of staying healthy last year. He handled that workload like a champ, and I don't know about you, but it always seems like McCaffrey gets stronger as the game goes on.
Yes.
And as long as he's healthy, he can wear down a defense to the point where... And he had a touchdown streak there that they tried to keep. I don't know if you remember that last year.
They tried to force it at the end, and that didn't go well when they forced it.
They were up so big, and they were just like, we need to get him his touchdown. But yeah, I concur with you. Jordan Mason needs to be owned in all leagues right now, because if anything happens to CMC, he might be a top 15 running back right out of the gate. And that's crazy. That's crazy. All right, so last team here, we have the Seahawks cutting wide receiver D. Eskridge. He got into some legal trouble last year, missed like the first 6 games due to a suspension, and now they cut him. And I do want to make a Seahawks note here that I have officially moved JSN, Jackson Smith Njigba, in front of Tyler Lockett on the depth chart, and I have updated the rankings and the projections to show that.
All right. I don't think there's anything crazy with Seattle and their roster cuts, so I think that that pretty much does it. Does it? Does it? Does it? Does it do it, Jeff?
I'm done if you're done.
All right.
I'm letting you lead, fearless leader.
It's okay. I let you talk a lot this time, Jeff. I know you're thrilled.
Hey, I like the sound of my own voice.
Well, at least somebody does. And that does it for another episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you all for downloading and listening to this episode. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please leave us a comment and share the show. Every little bit helps.
You can find us on all podcasting apps by searching N2E Fantasy and with our handle at N2E Fantasy on all social media platforms. Please join our community and give us a follow. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, it's truly never too early for fantasy football. Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.